Federal prosecutors accused the Russians of using discovery information from the special counsel's office to discredit the ongoing investigation into Moscow's election interference. It concerns Concord Management, a company owned by a close associate of Vladimir Putin. It's one of three entities the special counsel's office accuses of helping to mastermind the social media effort to meddle in the 2016 election. According to court documents filed yesterday, a Twitter account called Hacking Redstone promoted information on a website that contained the files the special counsel's office says it provided to Concord Management in the discovery process. Prosecutors say the non-sensitive material was altered and released as part of a disinformation campaign. The website was eventually linked back to Russia. The filing is aimed at explaining why Mueller is opposed to sharing sensitive evidence with the accused Russian troll farm.
You know, you really do have to wonder, Willie, sometimes just how stupid some of these people are. I mean, you're going to, first of all, you know, Gates and Manafort and all these guys going in lying to Bob Mueller, that never ends well. No. And now you've got this company linked to Russia, altering the documents and sending them out there. You know what? You just leave Bob Mueller alone if he's in your sights. It's just not going to end well for you.
Don't poke the bear has always been a good lesson.
You don't pull on Superman's cape. Yeah. You don't spit in the wind. Right.
So to boil down what Mika just read,
a
Russian entity is interfering in the investigation into Russian interference into the 2016 election.
Yes.
Not quite learning their lesson, it appears.
No, and Admiral, by the end of this, we may look at the big bad Russians and say, boy, there was some real incompetence in there as well.
Indeed. You've got to ask yourself, how capable are the Russians if they're going to put a scheme like this into play? And, you know, this ought to tell us, A, they're not 10 feet tall, certainly, and B, they're very discoverable if we are willing to shine a light on this. That's what's seen today.
Talking about them being discoverable, what impact do you think Mueller's filings had several months ago, where we told the Russians and the world, not only do we know where you hacked us from, we know what the building was, we know what keystrokes you hit, we know what officer was sitting at the computer when you were doing that. In fact, we know so much more about you than you will ever hope to know about us. What message does that send to the Russian intel community?
Yeah, it's kind of a two-edged sword. It's a feel-good moment, certainly, and it might have some capability in terms of deterring them a bit. On the other hand, Joe, and you know this,
you don't want to give the information out.
Exactly.
Right.
At the end of the day, the information is valuable. Your sources and methods are the crown jewels of intelligence. So you really want to kind of hold those back.
But the question is, does it
moment.
act as a deterrent?
Well, and I think that is, so far, the answer is no, because we see them continue to prod and poke.
Yeah, so far they're acting with impunity, and they've gotten quite a lot of mileage. I mean, if you look at Russia, not just this, but Russian foreign policy over the last couple of years, talk about getting a lot of mileage, to mix metaphors, out of a pretty weak hand.
Gosh.
They've gotten extraordinary return on what they've done in the Middle East, in Ukraine, with American elections, with Brexit. I'm hard pressed. I don't know about you, Jim. I'm hard pressed to think of another country that actually had fewer resources that has as much to show for us.
Please find me, and I open this up to the table and any viewer. Please find me over the last, in modern history, please find me a country, a weaker country, playing a stronger hand at the same time that their global competitor, a stronger country, is playing a weaker hand. Madeleine Albright talked about that yesterday. I can't think of an example.
No, there is not one. And here you have to give credit, if you will, to Vladimir Putin, who is a very capable tactician. He's a bad strategist in the sense that he will eventually lead Russia down a rabbit hole.
Right.
Russia needs to integrate with the West. That's their future. China looks at Siberia, all of its resources. Nobody lives there like my dog looks at a ribeye steak. It looks really tasty.
Well-
China, over time, will exert itself on Russia, and Putin's strategy is going to fail the Rodini. It's going to fail Russia in the end.
It will, and again, I always accuse Donald Trump of being a day trader, but at the end of the day,
Totally.
Vladimir Putin is a day trader. Here's a country
Exactly.
that desperately needs to be brought in
A strategy.
to the world community. They need a strategy for integrating into the 21st century
Absolutely.
instead of mourning what happened on Christmas Day 1991. It's over. The Soviet Union fell. So where does Russia go from here?
You're exactly right. There's no real economy. He hasn't introduced a dose of economic reform. And you know what? They're also going to have a succession problem. One of the problems with countries like Russia is when you have no political legitimacy, how do you transfer power? China's going to run into that problem potentially. Russia surely is. Turkey, you go around the world, all these top-heavy systems, they are sowing the seeds for their own instability.
And that's what worries me the most right now about Russia is, yes, Vladimir Putin scares us. You know what should scare us even more?
What comes after?
A Russia without Vladimir Putin, because we can all remember the Russia before Vladimir Putin was frightening as hell because there were nuclear weapons,
Of course.
stockpiles of nuclear weapons. There was no control over those nuclear weapons. It was chaos. Speaking of chaos, I can't let you go before we talk about Venezuela.
Sure.
So let's talk about Venezuela.
Let's do it. Before we get there, I do want to say one thing about Russia to close, which is we ought to be more concerned about Russian weakness than Russian strength.
Exactly.
So, Venezuela.
And by the way, this is, sorry, don't yell at me, Alex, because
he
you know, I wither. I get weak and I crumble like a delicate
never yell,
flower
kid
when you
gloves.
do. Yeah. But I don't think we can underline this more for our viewers. That while we should fear what Vladimir Putin is doing to our democracy, the greater long-term threat is a Russia without Vladimir Putin working through a transition, a peaceful transition, because Russia without a powerful leader.
Correct.
Without a powerful form of government. The Russia of 1991, 1992, 1993. I mean, I was just out of law school, but I even knew enough then to be scared. I was more scared of that Russia than I was of the Russia of 1987, 1988, 1999 when they were the Soviet Union, because it was chaos.
Exactly. And that is why, in the end, we should confront Russia where we must, but we ought to look for zones of cooperation. We ought to find ways to pull them toward the West. If they can't create a strategy, we should try and build one for them and execute it and bring them into the family of nations.
Venezuela, Richard, go. So Alex doesn't just... I got to get him to stop screaming at it. It's a tirade today, isn't it?
Speaking of strong men.
What Venezuela has become in some ways is a battle for the hearts and minds of the Venezuelan military. They hold the balance of power. And the question is, are they going to continue to support this regime? At the top level, yes. At lower levels, I think there's question marks. We're also beginning to see the regime resort to police forces, to basically extra-legal, also known as illegal police forces, to basically round people up. So things are deteriorating. What we don't know, particularly as we ramp up sanctions, is how long things will hold together now there. So I think that's the play we're in. We're increasing the pressure on them from the outside, economically, politically. The real question is, in all these situations, and basically every time you have an authoritarian system that begins to unravel, the question is, how long when do the rats start leaving the ship?
Right.
How long do the security forces that have propped up Maduro stand by him? That's the phase we're in. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months or longer, and that's where the Russians, the Chinese, and the Cubans, above all, become important, because in some ways they're the glue behind what's become a very brittle regime.
And while we're talking about a strong country playing a bad hand, can we even, I mean, Admiral, can you please explain to Americans watching and people around the world that are watching, how many now across the world in Armed Forces Radio, Willie? 87 million every day. I think it's 87 million every day. More people, by the way, little known fact, will watch this episode of Morning Joe than the last 5 Super Bowls combined. So what you say, Admiral,
It matters deeply.
But talk about Venezuela's history, how this is a country, oil-rich country, that should be thriving, that had every natural advantage, and mismanagement, bad government, socialism run amok, tyrannical leaders have destroyed this country, brought it to the edge of chaos.
Yeah, not to do a John Meacham on you, but this is the country that Simón Bolívar centered. This is the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This is where democracy began in the Americas. So at the end of the day, the tragedy here is not Nicolas Maduro, the current leader, it's Hugo Chavez who preceded him, invented this half-baked socialist strategy called Chavismo, named after himself, and destroyed the oil industry, cratered the economy, and then died just as oil prices went down, and handed the whole mess to a bus driver named Nicolas Maduro. If there was ever an example of Karl Marx's line that history always repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce, it's Venezuela going from Chavez, the tragedy who destroyed the country, to Maduro, the farce. Richard nailed it on his summary. The only thing I would add to it is there's not a good military option here. And there'll be temptations to, like, steam a carrier battle group down there, or put the 82nd Airborne on alert. Wrong. This is political, economic, diplomatic. We can do this. I think there's a 2 in 3 chance we can sort this thing out reasonably, but us loading up the military and launching it is not the right next move.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you, and thank you
Admiral.
for the Simón Bolívar reference. It's really
I did
good.
it all for John.
Sorry, he couldn't make it this morning.
We were so afraid you
Couldn't make it.
going to talk about Tyler
Thank goodness.
Miller Fillmore when you brought up Meacham.
About 200
All right.
years more recent than Meacham goes.
Coming up, President Trump unveiled a new slogan last week: build a wall and crime will fall. Now it appears he could change that to "we didn't build a wall because of Paul." We'll explain that ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.